Hello, I'm Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. And welcome to this conversation with Lithuania's Foreign Minister, the Honorable Gabrielius Landsbergis. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for joining us during your very busy trip to Washington. The Minister has served in many positions in his past before joining the Foreign Ministry in December of 2020. He's also a member of Parliament and has been involved in Lithuanian politics for quite some time. And I'm really excited to have you here today because Lithuania has become such a prominent actor on the promotion of democracy and human rights. Your country has really been, I think, at the forefront in Europe, certainly, in terms of promoting individual rights, freedom, and liberty. I think given your own history as a nation, that makes a lot of sense, but still it's something that I think has become incredibly impressive to watch over time. And so against this backdrop, I'm really keen to hear from you about why it's been so important for Lithuania to really become, one, a center for democracy activists from Belarus, from Russia, from other places, to be a safe harbor for these freedom fighters as we think of them. And of course, I'm so delighted to have you here. We've had a long engagement with the embassy here, as well as your predecessor Alina Polyakova, who was our recipient of the Freedom Fighter Award last year as well. So thank you again. And let me just get right into it. Why has it been so important for Lithuania to prioritize democracy issues and to also provide safe haven for Belarusian democracy activists and Russian democracy activists over the last years?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here today and possibility to speak and talk. I would say that there are primarily 3 points that I could make answering your question. First of all, it has to do with geography. You know, we're a forefront country. We neighbor two authoritarian countries. One to the east, another one, contrary to many beliefs, to the west, because we have a border with Kaliningrad, which is a part of Russia. And since both countries have a community of democratically inclined people, a political class who is looking for and still have a belief that their countries deserve better, that their countries deserve a democratic future. And it was clear from the outset that they would need a safe harbor, somewhere where they could be free to express their political ideas, where they could have a possibility to move, to teach, to talk to each other, and to write, and basically to have this creative political freedom as close to their home as possible. And Lithuania is a logical choice. Secondly, I would say that we still have this feeling of freedom still in there. That means that our own fight for freedom is not something that is just part of history books. It's still in the air. It's still, people remember our fight. We still remember the countries that supported us, and we cherish the memory. But then we feel it as part of our obligation also, that we should commit ourselves to helping others. And third thing is, I would say that values-based foreign policy actually is also practical policy. Many would say we need economic ties with autocratic regimes because it's so easy to, because you have just one phone number to call, and if you agreed, then everything goes fine. But our experience shows that it's absolutely the contrary. All the economic ties with authoritarian countries actually end up bad. And therefore, current government in Lithuania has committed itself that we need to build more meaningful ties with the democratic communities across the globe, and not only politically, but also economically, because it's safer long term, and it serves our interests better. So, as I said before, values-based foreign policy is also practical.
Can I follow up on that point you just made? Because I find myself making a similar point, mainly because I do think that we're in a geopolitical environment where there are questions emerging about whether a values-based foreign policy is really the right way forward, as we are engaged in a competition for values with authoritarian states, most notably China, obviously Russia, which remains a direct military threat to your country and other countries in Europe. But when you say that it's a practical foreign policy, I mean, how do you see that from the perspective of the Baltic states, perspective of Lithuania in particular? Because I do think that idea is very much being debated right now, hotly debated. That we don't want to have a Cold War with China, for example, that we want to have a good partnership with China when it makes sense. But how do we still maintain our commitment to values, given the nature of the global economic relationship we have with a country like China, which is an authoritarian state? So how do you make it a practical foreign policy in this geopolitical environment?
Well, with what I mean by saying that, I think that it is possible that we underestimate the power of rule of law in the international relations and international economic relations as well. I am absolutely convinced that the agreements between the countries who follow the rule of law, and I would say that most of them are democratic countries, because that's the way usually it works. It would be probably difficult to find a country that is democratic and not rule of law country, because basically democracy is based on rule of law, because there are rules that you have to agree to and stick to. So that makes any relationship between two countries predictable. Since economy is based not on a short term, very rarely on short-term returns, but more of a long-term contracts and whatnot. So you have to trust your partner, and in order to trust your partner, you have to abide the same rules and laws. If the other partner does not, or is writing its own rule book, for international relations, so how can you trust that your agreement will hold longer than some years, or who knows how long? Obviously, bigger countries who have economic power enough to force the agreements on even on non-democratic regimes, they might say differently. But for smaller countries, for smaller economies like Lithuania, the rules-based world economic environment is a basic principle that we want to see in the world. Therefore, I think this is one of the main reasons why it's practical.
Right. So what I hear you saying is that we have to have a baseline of shared values on which we have the ability to build trust, and without those values, it's really impossible to build trust. And without trust, how can we build long-lasting alliances and relationships? And of course, we are sitting here in Washington, D.C., so let me turn a little bit to the transatlantic relationship. And of course, we have some multilateral institutions that Lithuania is a core part of, the EU and NATO. And there's been, I think, also a bit of a debate as to what should the role of NATO be, for example, in promoting democratic values and principles, when we are seeing some backsliding on democratic governance in some NATO member states and also in some EU member states. So what do you think should be the role of these multilateral institutions? NATO is going through its own reassessment of the 2030 reflection process, but what role should these multilateral institutions like NATO and the EU play in ensuring our common commitment to democratic values and principles?
Well, I would say, the very important word that you're using is commitment. That countries who are a part of international organization, a union, they have to commit. And we've seen and we observed that it's at times it's quite difficult to agree, especially with the countries who are already apart, it's easier to agree with the countries who are striving to be apart. Those who are apart, they sometimes feel that they don't need. It's impossible to. They are impossible to be forced to oblige to any commitments that they made before. But I think that what we need now is a certain recommitment, and I've discussed that with a number of officials here in Washington during my visit, that democracy and basic principles like rule of law and human rights, it's not a one-time commitment. We're seeing backsliding because we need recommitment. We need countries to recommit that basically the agreements that we signed when entering EU, when entering NATO, this is an obligation that needs to be revisited. Are we still on the same page? Do we still abide by the same rules and kind of get back to the roots of it and maybe put a signature once more to this agreement? And it's especially important now with the upcoming Democracy Forum conference here that will be held in December, most probably, where I would expect to see a certain commitment, not just a gathering of political ideas why democracy is important, because I think that even those countries who witnessed sorts of a backslide in democratic institutions, they would say that, yeah, democracy is still very important, but then we need commitment. And to remake commitment, even for those who had made this before.
Well, let's talk about this planned summit for democracy that the Biden administration has been putting together and thinking through. And I agree that it's an important effort, that we need to really shore up our ability to build democratic coalitions once again. But from the perspective of Lithuania, what would be the top concrete things, items, steps, actions that you would like to see come out of such a summit?
Well, I think that there is a possibility that the countries who participate, that they would commit to a certain agreements between the democratic countries that against kleptocracy, against corruption, and I think these are the abuses against human rights. And I think that there are certain areas where we can reach and reinforce the agreement that would reach out further than just EU and NATO, but it would have a very strong backbone. But we would need to commit to it in the sense that the countries that don't have special laws and regulations, that they would implement it. We could follow the money where the autocratic regimes are trying to hide it in democratic countries. They're abusing our banking systems. They're abusing our financial systems. And not everybody is keen on following the money and cutting the bad practices. But I think this could be one of the concrete things that could come out of the summit.
Mm-hmm. And there is quite a bit of interest now, it seems, in Washington in particular, on this issue where we are seeing some legislation being proposed in the U.S. Congress, and it's moving at a pace that we haven't seen previously. And I think we're seeing some of that also in the European Parliament, in Brussels, and obviously in your national debates as well. Well, one last question, and I do want to make sure we talk a little bit about Russia. Clearly, the U.S. administration is pivoting its focus on China. And seeing China as the greatest challenge to the United States in the long term. And the Secretary of State, the U.S. President, have said multiple times that they want a predictable and reliable relationship with Moscow. I think sitting in Lithuania, in a country that was once occupied by the Soviet Union, I think the Russian threat looks quite different in Vilnius than it does in Washington. So, given that Russia still presents a direct military threat to your country, obviously occupies parts of Ukraine, Georgia, elsewhere, how would you think about balancing the Russia threat and the China challenge?
Well, I think that the only thing that we can predict about Russia is that it's aggressive. And that's quite predictable, because what we're seeing now with the Zapad exercise that's going on almost as we speak is that they are exerting power, and there's a show of force in the exercise, which is in its core, it's offensive. It's not defensive. They're planning to occupy parts of. They're training to occupy parts of Poland, parts of Lithuania. But that is predictable. Basically, we knew that it was there since 2008 when they occupied parts of Georgia, 2014, even earlier this year when they militarized heavily the border of Ukraine, bringing troops and equipment and leaving it there. So this part is obvious, and I think that it will stay like this. Russia is not a stable regime that is fixed geographically, and this is what is worrying. And I think that this is one of the main messages that also I brought with me here to Washington, is that we cannot say, in no way we cannot say that Russia is a non-issue. I think that even though many would agree that Russia is a declining power, but it's still a nuclear declining power, and is ready to a lot of damage on its way down. So if we're looking for in the longer term into the future, and I think that it's obvious that China presents a bigger challenge, because it's still a power that hasn't flexed its muscles. It's starting to do that, and we already are cautious about this. But we need to stay vigilant about what Russia is doing, and I think it would be a mistake to turn our back to Kremlin.
And has that been the main message you've been trying to convey during your meetings with U.S. government officials here? I
wouldn't say a main message. I would say one of the few messages, because now we're experiencing a number of issues, and some of them have to do with Russia and Belarus and their closer union between the two regimes, especially in the military field, which is worrying to the whole Baltic and a bit broader region. But then again, the issues that we're facing with China's coercion to Lithuania, and I think it's again, we're trying to see whether there is an opportunity to use the situation, and that Western countries would, especially countries in the region, in European Union, would get the message that it is possible to withstand a coercion from non-democratic countries with help from the partners in the West.
Well, Mr. Minister, I hope your message is being well received here in Washington. It's certainly being well received here at SIPA as an organization. We worked on raising awareness around the Russia threat since our founding some years ago, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this discussion today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.